On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, something happened that no one in the park would ever forget. A little girl with torn shoes walked past a group of children, and they laughed. Their voices were sharp, their eyes unkind. She kept her head down, trying to disappear. Sitting nearby was an old veteran, watching in silence. He saw what others missed, not her shoes, but her courage. Slowly, he stood up, walked over, and knelt beside her. In that simple act, the laughter stopped, and in that stillness, something powerful was restored: dignity, kindness, and the quiet strength of a man who had seen war. Her name was Ellie, 8 years old, small for her age, with a quiet face and big brown eyes that always seemed to be searching. That Tuesday, she wore a faded blue shirt 2 sizes too large and jeans with worn-out knees. But it was her shoes that drew attention, scuffed frayed at the toes, the sole of the right one barely hanging on. She and her mother had just moved into a small rented room above the laundromat on Elm Street. Her mother, a waitress at the diner on 3rd, worked double shifts nearly every day. They had no car, no cable, and dinner often meant toast with peanut butter. But Ellie was the kind of child who smiled anyway. She didn't ask for much. She understood. More than most kids her age, like how to warm a bowl of soup without asking for help, or how to stay quiet when her mother came home exhausted, shoes in hand and eyes heavy from the day. At school, Ellie kept to herself, not because she didn't want friends, but because she didn't know how to explain that the only toys she had were from a thrift store, or that her backpack used to belong to her cousin and still had his name written on it in black marker. Still, she tried. She joined the line at recess, waited her turn at the swings, and smiled when someone made eye contact. That day, the sun was gentle, with leaves rustling lightly through the playground fence. Ellie walked across the blacktop alone, heading for the slide. That's when it started. A boy, older, maybe 4th grade, pointed. "Look at her shoes," he shouted. His voice rang loud and sharp across the yard. A couple of girls turned. One of them laughed. "Did she dig those out of the trash?" Another said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ellie froze. She looked down. Her shoes, the ones she had tried to clean the night before with an old toothbrush and a little baking soda, were falling apart. The toe of her sock peeked through. She pulled her jeans lower, trying to cover them, trying to disappear. More laughter followed. A group of children had started to gather. Some didn't say anything, but they stared. Others pointed. No one stepped. In Ellie's face flushed. Her hands went rigid at her sides. She didn't cry. Not there, not in front of them, but inside. Something folded up, like paper, like hope being pressed into a corner and taped shut. And that's when he saw her, across the playground. Beyond the fence that bordered the park, sat an old man on a bench. He wore a dark green jacket, shoulders stiff and square. On his head was a weathered cap with the words "Vietnam Veteran" embroidered above a faded eagle. His name was Hank, 73 years old, retired mechanic. Every Tuesday, he came to that bench. Not for company, just to sit. He said the sound of children reminded him that the world still had good in it, but that day he saw something that didn't feel good at all. He watched the children, watched the little girl shrink, watched the laughter that was supposed to be innocent turn into something cruel, and he felt it, the same anger that had once pushed him through battlefields, the same instinct to protect. He stood, his knees ached, and it took a second for him to get steady. He walked slowly, but with purpose, crossing the gravel path and pushing open the playground gate. No one noticed him at first. Not until he passed the swings and stepped into the circle of children. He didn't shout, didn't scold. He just walked to Ellie and knelt in front of her. The crowd fell silent. He looked at her shoes, then up at her eyes. His own were blue. Tired, but steady. From the pocket of his coat, he pulled something wrapped in cloth. A patch, old and frayed. A medal, bronze star. He had earned it on a hill in 1968, under fire, when the only thing that kept him moving was the thought of making it home. He placed the medal in Ellie's hand. "You walk in shoes like these," he said softly, "and still hold your head up. That's courage most people never understand." The children around them said nothing. Some looked away. The boy who laughed first suddenly seemed unsure of himself. One of the girls wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Ellie looked down at the medal, her lip trembling, then looked up at the old man kneeling before her. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time all day. Hank stood up slowly. The world seemed to hold its breath. Without another word, he turned and walked back across the playground. He sat on the bench, placed his cap back on his head, and stared. Out at the trees swaying in the wind, the kids never mocked Ellie again. In fact, something shifted after that day. A few started saying hello. One girl gave her a sticker the next morning. Small things, but to Ellie, they felt like stepping into the sunlight. She kept the medal in a small tin beside her bed, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. And Hank, he still came every Tuesday. But now, Ellie would wave at him from the monkey bars. Sometimes she'd even run over and sit with him, telling him about her day. They didn't talk much about that moment, the one when the laughter stopped. They didn't need to, because some kindnesses speak louder than words, and some heroes don't carry weapons. They just kneel when no one else will. He sat alone on the park bench near the old chain-link fence, exactly where he always did, every Tuesday just after lunch. Same time, same place. His name was Hank Whitmore, 73, a retired mechanic, widower, and proud veteran of the U.S. Army. The grey cap on his head bore a faded insignia. Vietnam veteran. The stitching worn from time and weather. Most folks around town knew him by sight, but not by name. He didn't say much. He walked with a slight limp, the legacy of a minefield injury in '69, and wore the same olive-green jacket year-round, even when the sleeves started to fray. The kids at the playground never paid much attention to him. To them, he was just another quiet old man watching the world go by. But Hank was always watching. Not idly, deliberately. It had been his habit for years. Ever since his wife passed, he found comfort in routine. Tuesday afternoons, he came to this bench with a thermos of weak coffee, sat beneath the oak tree, and listened to the sound of children playing. There was something healing in it. The squeak of swings, the scrape of sneakers on pavement, the shrieks of laughter unburdened by the weight of the world. But that Tuesday, the laughter was different. Hank knew the sound of cruelty. He'd heard it on schoolyards before. He'd heard it in barracks, in battlefields, even in hospital wards. It always started the same. A sharp note rising from a group, singling out someone smaller, someone different. He looked up from his thermos. A circle of children had gathered near the monkey bars. In the center stood a little girl, small frame, tangled ponytail, clothes worn and too large for her. Her shoes caught his eye first, or rather, the lack of them. They were torn, flapping at the front, with the toe of her sock exposed. He could see her trying to tuck the loose fabric beneath the hem of her jeans, as if that could hide what they were mocking. The boy who pointed was tall and loud. "Hey, look at her shoes. You steal those from a trash can," he shouted. The others laughed, not kindly, not the way children sometimes laugh by mistake. This was the kind of laugh meant to cut. Hank's jaw tightened. His coffee went cold in his hand. The girl didn't cry. She didn't run. She just stood there, shrinking into herself, arms locked at her sides. Her shoulders trembled, though her face tried to stay still. That silence, the kind that follows humiliation, fell heavy over the playground. Hank had seen that look before. He'd seen it on the face of a young private from Tennessee, too embarrassed to ask for help cleaning his uniform after being hazed. He'd seen it in the mirror the day he came back from Vietnam, and a man at the bus station called him a baby killer. He set the thermos down and slowly rose to his feet. His knees groaned in protest, stiff from years of hard labor and old war wounds. He steadied himself with one hand on the bench. His steps were careful but deliberate as he crossed the gravel path. No one noticed him at first. The children were too focused on their target. Even the teachers on yard duty were facing the opposite direction, chatting under the shade of the maple trees. He passed the swings, moved past the seesaw, and stepped into the group of children like parting a quiet sea. For a moment, no one said anything. Even the boy who had laughed the loudest fell quiet when he saw the old man approach. Hank's presence was calm, but not soft. He had that look. The kind soldiers carry the weight of time, of memory, of things they never speak. He didn't raise his voice, didn't scold or lecture. He simply took off his cap, a gesture of respect, and knelt beside the little girl. The children around them held their breath, up close. Hank could see the dirt on her laces, the hole in the sock, the shame in her eyes, but he also saw strength, a quiet kind, the kind that comes from surviving moments like this. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small cloth bundle, something he had carried for over 50 years. Inside it was an old Bronze Star medal, dulled by age, its ribbons slightly faded. It wasn't something he showed people, not because he wasn't proud, but because he never wanted applause for doing what had to be done. He gently placed the medal in her hand. Her fingers barely moved at first, as if she didn't know whether she was allowed to touch it. "You walk in shoes like these," Hank said softly, his voice steady and low, "and still stand tall. That takes guts most people never find their whole lives." Her eyes widened, her lip quivered, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded. He patted her shoulder and slowly stood up. It took effort. The ground was hard, and his joints didn't forgive him like they used to. But once he was upright, he turned to face the group of children. He didn't say a single word to them. He didn't have to. The silence was louder than any reprimand. One girl looked down at her shoes. Another boy backed away slowly. The tall kid who had mocked her turned red and stuffed his hands in his pockets. Not a soul in that circle could meet Hank's gaze. With nothing more said, Hank turned and walked back the way he came. The wind picked up, rustling the trees overhead. Ellie remained where she was, medal still clutched in her hand. When Hank reached the bench, he sat down slowly, put his cap back on, and looked straight ahead. He didn't look back to see what happened next. He didn't need to. But if he had, he would have seen something small and good unfold. One of the girls broke from the group and walked over to Ellie. She didn't say anything either, just stood next to her like an ally. Then another came, and another. The crowd didn't laugh again. They didn't even whisper. The circle dissolved, scattered by the weight of a moment none of them could quite explain. That day, Ellie didn't just survive recess. She changed the playground, and Hank. He stayed on that bench another hour. The thermos was still there. The coffee was cold, but he didn't mind. Some battles don't require rifles or orders. Some don't happen overseas. Some are fought quietly, with a single step, a single gesture, a kneel in the dirt beside a little girl no one else had the courage to stand with. And for those who watched it unfold, young and old alike, the world felt just a little more right than it did before. Hank knelt slowly, the gravel pressing into his knee as he steadied himself in front of the little girl. Ellie stood frozen, clutching the frayed hem of her jeans. Her eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. She wasn't used to being seen, not really. Most people passed her by with quick glances, if they noticed her at all. But this old man, he was looking straight at her, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something she didn't quite recognize. Maybe respect. He looked down at her shoes, torn, worn thin, barely holding together at the seams, then back up into her face. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips pressed tight in silence, trying to stay strong in a moment that felt anything. But Hank didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat, that same pocket he'd kept, zipped since the funeral of his best friend back in '71. From it, he drew out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. He unrolled it carefully, revealing a medal old, dulled by time, its ribbons slightly frayed, and the bronze edges scratched from years of handling. A service patch sat next to it, edges curled and threadbare. This was no trinket. This was history. He gently placed the medal into Ellie's small hand. Her fingers instinctively curled around it, unsure of what it meant, but instinctively knowing it mattered. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Hank spoke, voice deep worn and steady. "You see these kids?" he said, nodding slightly toward the group that still stood in awkward silence. "Not one of them has ever walked a mile in shoes like yours. They laugh because they don't understand." Ellie looked up at him, startled, that he wasn't angry, not at her, not even at the others. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He was simply telling the truth, the way only someone who had seen real hardship could. "But you," Hank continued, his gaze never leaving hers, "you keep walking anyway, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. That makes you braver than most grown men I've known." His voice was calm, without a hint of drama or show. It was the voice of someone who had lived long enough to know that small moments can carry deep weight, and that kindness, when given freely, could be a greater force than any battle. Behind them, the playground was still. The wind moved through. The trees, a soft rustle that filled the silence left behind. The children who had laughed now stood awkwardly in place. The tall boy who had pointed earlier looked down at his sneakers, as if seeing them for the first time. His face was red, his shoulders hunched. He didn't say a word. The girl who had giggled covered her mouth with her hand. She turned away, slightly, wiping her eyes quickly when she thought no one was watching. But Ellie, she didn't cry. Not anymore. Something had shifted inside her. She stood a little straighter, the medal still clutched tightly in her palm. Her shoes hadn't changed. The holes were still there. The socks still showed. But for the first time, she didn't try to hide them, because someone who mattered, had seen past all that. Not for what she lacked, but for who she was. To the others, she was the girl with broken shoes. But to Hank, she was a child with unbroken spirit. He rose to his feet slowly, steadying himself with a soft grunt, the pain in his knees echoing the years behind him. He didn't look back at the kids, didn't wait for applause or even acknowledgement. He simply gave Ellie a small nod, a soldier's nod, and turned to walk back to his bench. And somehow, in the silence he left behind, something powerful remained. The teasing didn't continue. The children didn't return to their mocking. Instead, they slowly dispersed. A few glanced at Ellie with new eyes. One girl even walked over to stand beside her, not saying anything, just being there. The tall boy wandered off toward the slide, quieter than he'd ever been. Later that afternoon, when the bell rang and the playground emptied, Ellie was still holding the medal. She didn't put it in her backpack. She didn't pocket it. She just kept it in her hand, turning it over gently, as if to memorize its weight. She never forgot what he said, and Hank. He returned to his bench, the place he always sat on Tuesdays. But that day, the view felt different. He watched the leaves shift in the breeze and listened to the quiet hum of the street nearby. His heart, once hardened by war and grief, felt the faint warmth of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, because sometimes the world changes, not with noise, not with force, but with the silent act of one man kneeling down to lift someone else up. The old veteran rose to his feet, slowly and carefully, as if the weight of memory rested on his shoulders. He placed his worn cap back on his head, the same one he'd worn through decades of life, loss and service. There was no applause, no cheering crowd, just the rustle of wind through the trees and the fading sound of children returning to their classrooms. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't need it. What he had come to do, what needed to be done, had already been done, without fanfare. Without force, Hank walked back to his bench, step by steady step, and sat down just as he always did. But the world felt quieter now, not in a sad way, in a peaceful way. As he looked up, the leaves above him swirled gently in the breeze, falling like soft reminders of time passing. That afternoon, he hadn't faced a battlefield with bullets and orders, but he had faced something just as real, cruelty dressed as childhood laughter, indifference hiding behind silence. And he met it not with anger, but with compassion, and in doing so, he won, because some of the greatest battles in life are fought not with weapons, but with dignity, empathy, and the courage to do the right thing, even when no one else does. And sometimes, the truest heroes are not the ones who stand tall, but the ones who choose to kneel, quietly, purposefully, when the world needs them most. If this story touched your heart like it touched ours, consider subscribing to our channel for more real, moving stories from everyday American lives. Sometimes, it's the small moments that leave the biggest marks.